2022, HIBAC 2022, HIBAC 2023, FLP Words and Embers. She was the guest spoken word artist at the first edition of the Youth Opportunity Summit in 2024. Thank you for coming, Hidayah. The next panelist, you've been seeing him moving around his set somehow, and he was a judge yesterday, but a proper introduction is Abdul Basit Abubakar is a writer and storyteller with a background in development, communication. His works have appeared on Brittle Paper, Guinevere Review, Practice Magazine, Poets in Nigeria, Words, Rhymes, and Rhythms, and other publications. He's passionate about culture, love, and writing about the diversity of languages. Thank you so much, Abdul Basit. When you are done, please take a seat. The next panelist is Dr. Murtala Uba Muhammad, who is a multifaceted writer, poet, and translator, whose works have been featured in various anthologies, including Al-Majiri, Songs of Al-Majiri, Corona Blues, Corruption, and Tentabara. His Hausa poetry collection, Hawaiinia, was published in 2023 by Fombina Publishing Company. He also served as judge in several literary contests, and he has moderated and presented papers at various intellectual forums on issues of peace and climate change and governance. He was also the chairman of the Association of Nigerian Authors, Anna Kanu chapter, and Northwest Public Relations Officer of the Northern Nigerian Writers Summit. He holds a PhD in geography and teaches at BUK. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. And then the host of this panel is Paul Liam. He's a poet, a literary critic, and author of 2 poetry collections, Indefinite Cravings and Saint Shadi and Other Poems. A 2014 fellow of the Ebedi International Writers Residency, Shenyang, and a co-editor of the Ebedi Review. In 2014, he was honored with an award of literary excellence for his contributions to the development of literature in Nigeria. Similarly, he has also been recognized by the Hilltop Creative Arts Authors, Niger State, for his contributions to the growth of literature. He has attended several literary and arts festivals, including the Abuja Lit Fest, Lagos International Poetry Festival, and many others. He was also at the first Northern Nigerian Writers Summit. He's also a communications consultant based in Abuja. Thank you so much for coming, Paul, and I hand over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having me in Kano. This is the first time in a long time that I'm attending a literary festival in this part of the country. And I feel delighted that these organizers of this very important festival have deemed it necessary to have me to moderate this panel. Having said that, I would not waste our time with too much dialogue. I would like to quickly lead us into the conversation. This brilliant panelists that I have here, I'm sure will do justice to the topic, the orphaned form of spoken word poetry. In setting the context to our conversation, I would like to say that over the years in northern Nigeria, and perhaps in Nigeria in general, we have known certain oral poets, maybe musicians they call them, traditional musicians they call them. As we go ahead, I would like us to see how we can link what we have today as spoken word poetry and the works of the likes of Mama Shata. We have the Dame Maria in Jos. We have even in Benue, for example, where I'm from, we have the likes of Golozo. We have the likes of Tondo Kubu. These were very popular traditional, singers from that part. In Niger, we have Hajia Fatima Lolo. These are very traditional musicians whose, works have been regarded as some of the foundation or surviving foundation of our oral tradition, maybe in northern Nigeria, in this part of the country. Then, of course, we don't have the younger ones like Serikin Waka, Nazir. We have the likes of Ali Jita, Alan Waka, and the likes. I listen to a lot of Hausa songs, if I should tell you guys. I love Hausa songs and I love listening to them. Now, Doctor, I'll start with you. Is spoken word poetry to start with? Secondly, how do we trace the connection between what we have today as spoken word poetry and the oral tradition, especially in the Hausa northern part of Nigeria?
I think to answer this question, we need to first of all ask ourselves what constitutes a poetry. Because even from the question you say spoken word poetry, a poetry, I think the addition of the word poetry already qualifies it as a poetry. And if at all the poetry is seen by having certain features, which has to do with the choice of words, which has to do with use of figures of speech, which has to do with trying to communicate in a language that sometimes one need to look at it deeper for him to understand the meaning. If these are the features that we see to say this is a poetry, then truly spoken word poetry is equally one out of so many poetries that we have. And what we consider as a poetry equally varies between communities, between language, between races. When you look at the traditional Hausa poetry and try to match it with the English poetry, the mainstream English poetry, you see a lot of dissimilarities. However, what binds them together is the fact that they are the work of art, they have a deeper meaning, you use figures of speech, you choose your words, and the poetry as well keep on changing, it's dynamic. What we define today as a poetry may not be the poetry in the last 3 or 4 decades. And equally, when you look at that, you see that spoken poetry is just one out of so many types of poetries that we have.
Okay, thank you very much, Doc. I'll move to Abu Basit. Abu Basit, one of the very common conversation often associated with the spoken word genre is that uh, it does not meet the same requirement. Practicing spoken word poetry in this part of the country, where maybe its acceptance may not be as popular as what they have in Lagos, like there is a market or Abuja. How do you reconcile, the supposition that spoken word poetry, one, is not poetry, one, that spoken word poetry is not poetry. And that is why, of course, as the topic of our conversation suggests, it is orphan. It is an orphan. It has no place. When they're discussing poetry, they hardly talk about spoken word poetry. Do you agree that spoken word poetry is actually an orphan and that it is not actual poetry?
No. So first of all, I am the wrongest person for you to assume, for anybody to assume I would say poetry, spoken word poetry is not poetry because I started writing poetry for a long while before I started performing poetry. And generally, it came out of the necessity of seeing a way to pass that poetry in another form. So saying spoken word poetry is often no, I wouldn't believe that because the father and the mother is poetry in its whatever form before it became spoken.
Yeah. So you do not believe that spoken word poetry is orphaned and that it isn't poetry.
Yes, sir.
You believe it is poetry.
Yes.
Now, let me move to Hidayat. Yeah. You are building a solid reputation as a spoken word poet. What has been the experience like for you as a spoken word poet, as a young spoken word poet, and a female spoken word poet who's trying to, speak to society? What has the experience been like for you?
It has been quite amazing because I have met a lot of people, a lot of artists, a lot of poets that have been very supportive. And most times you go to an event, you perform, and another person sees you and invites you to their event. So it has been quite good and mostly not challenging.
Has it been challenging?
Yes.
Oh, that's good to know. Are you willing to teach me? I want to become a spoken word poet.
If you're willing to learn,
I am. Thank you very much for the offer. Okay, thank you, Hidayat. But still on you, rather with you, I am interested in the fact that you say it's not challenging. How have you been inspired by, your environment, your cultural environment? Do you also listen to Hausa song like I do? Do you like Alan Waka?
yes, I love Kamsu Burika. I don't want that. I
No,
love.
that one is Afro Hausa pop. That's what Prof said the other time.
Well, I regard them as like it's a little different from Alan Waka. I listen to Alan Waka, I read his poems, and I love them.
Okay, but in general, what pushes you, what inspires you when you do spoken word?
Mostly cultural heritage,
Mm.
social injustices. That is what I usually write. I usually write about Nigeria. Recently, I wrote about Kano. I performed about the king, about the states,
Mm.
about the culture it has. That is what mostly inspires me.
Okay, thank you, Abdul Basit. Uh, how do we how do we bridge the gap in terms of public perception of spoken word poetry and the so-called page poetry? Because again, why you would like to say, as you have said, that you don't see any disparity because if it comes from poetry, it means it is poetry, is that the technicalities that are required in the development or production of a spoken word piece are not necessarily the same when it comes to page poetry or to written poetry. How do we reconcile these realities, knowing that this divergence exists?
All right. So, like you said, for me personally, I see a lot of writer poets that are coming up who take up the spoken word poetry form, and a lot of them have never written anything in the form of written poetry.
Yeah.
They just saw the spoken word poetry form and picked it up. So whether we like it or not, especially if you didn't study anything related to literature, you are bound to have missed those technicalities that you might require in written form of poetry. And that alone can cause what people would assume that the spoken word poetry form lacks that technicality. For me, I wouldn't say it is missing in my own kind of writing. And probably because I evolved from writing to saying it. Sometimes I perform and some people feel like, oh, there's a lot of technicalities in the performance. So it's mostly an individual thing, I believe. But then you, like she mentioned, she has performed at different events. And every event has the kind of audience that it requires. Even if you are doing a poetry video and putting it out, it goes to different kind of audiences. So it's mostly about the perception. If for you, Paul Liam, as a critic, as a poet, as a writer, sees me or hears my poems in performance, the way you see it is different from someone who does not understand the intricacies or knows the technicalities. So it goes down to who are you writing for, or who are you performing to, or what kind of message do you want to pass down. So I believe again that a lot of times there has been mentioned so much that the spoken word poetry form is mostly to reach out to more people who are not really subscribed to the written form. So if you are writing that, the question would be, do you require all the technicalities that are needed for you in your written form to go on to pass that message to your audiences or not?
Okay, I like your perspective, but I'm tempted to move to doctor. And for me, for doctor, I'm always seeking for correlation, yeah. Uh, because Abubasi is making a serious case for spoken word poetry, which is legitimate, yeah. But in terms of the oral tradition on this part of the country, and in terms of what is being produced by the younger generation, do you think that the younger generation have a good sense of the literary tradition, the oral tradition of, say, the Hausa people, assuming they were Hausa poets, young poets who are writing from Kano, for example? I don't know if you've listened to any of their works, and if you have, do you see any semblance in terms of consciousness, in terms of what differentiates the two generations, or the older generation and the new generation?
You see, Hausa tradition, or when you take Hausa people as a whole, you see that in the course of time and history, a lot of changes. Uh, Initially, when you look at Hausa culture, the oral tradition is very vibrant. But with the arrival of Islam and the Islamic revivalism in the early 19th century, when Sheikh Usman launched his jihad, now the oral tradition begins to decline in some ways. And that's when Hausa people now begins to embrace the idea of the conventional poetry, which is a written poetry. But even with that, the oral poetry continue to thrive. And you see the elements of performing poetry, which we now call the spoken word poetry, in some of the oral singers or oral poets of that time. When you look at, for instance, when you mentioned Dr. Mohamed Shata, whoever listened to his Malam Baba, Gabas, he will see how Shata is trying to translate his words into action. As he's singing, he's also sitting down, is making a lot of demonstration, trying to match the performance with his words. And also, when you look at the work of Mani Choge and some of these popular Hausa oral singers, you see a lot of elements of oral poetry in their work. But when we now, for those of us that learn poetry through schools and through literary forums like this one, you see that initially we started with writing a conventional Hausa poetry. But in recent time, you see some young people trying to now take us back to those oral poetry, or rather, they are trying to marry the two. That's why I always see spoken word poetry as a poetry plus.
Oh, it's poetry plus.
Yeah, it's a poetry plus.
Oh, that's
And when you
interesting.
look at it, you see that unlike people like Malam Moody speaking, like Betrare and the like, that will just stand up and read their poems, people like Akilo Aliyu and the like. Now, with that, this will not be appealing to the younger generation. But now, when you are performing, you see that a lot of people are getting captivated by that, and they are embracing it. They are embracing it rather. When you look at, as a young man, when I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, I used to listen to them Mariah, especially his song about labor. In labor shi ake cuta, Allah sa ba za ka tafi ba. Unknown to me that it is a written poetry of Malam Lawan Mai Turare, and many people don't know that about Malam Lawan, but they know it when later Dan Mariah just now put it in a perform, he performs it. So performance walk the talk. When you write a poetry, it's like you just have one. But when you match it with the performance. It now becomes
It enhances,
it
it
enhances it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Abu Basit. Doctor's last statement about performance enhancing the essence of the written form. I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the place of spoken word poetry in contemporary Nigerian literary space in terms of essence?
All right. So currently, especially in the north where I belong, and I know I see what I see, I can count so many spoken word poets here in this room that are of my generation, but I can hardly count how many of them have a published work. That is something. It shows we are going with the trend that is for our generation. And that alone is like an, a wake-up call to understand that every generation has what it relates to and what is most sellable in quote for them. And when it comes to essence of what we write and what others write, there is big similarity, and I see it constantly. For example, you've mentioned Dr. Mohamed Shata, Don Marai, just all the people. The themes they wrote about, they sang for traditional leaders, they sang for politicians, some of them, they sang about social issues. That's the same thing we are still talking about. You see spoken word poets come up and they are singing for comfort, they are doing poems for comfort or this person or that person. We saw the performances yesterday, there were a lot of social issues that were addressed, and it was an all-rounding issue. So it's mostly because their generation was able to understand that that was that tool they were able to use and pass on. Professor was here earlier and he mentioned the CC thing and how there were musical instruments earlier, but now the piano has taken over. But the issues are still the same issues. And I feel like it's necessary that, for example, that it's that generational thing. For example, a lot of people might have not had Hidayah perform live, but they've seen her on TikTok. They've seen her performance, they've seen her videos, and that travels far more than the live performances that she does. And a lot of people that have seen her performances have never seen her written poems. It's the generation and it's what's happening that will allow her to get to the audiences she wants to get to. And all of us that are in the spoken word business.
So if I get it correctly, one of the fundamental points of your statement is that each generation defines the means by which it exports its messages across to its audience.
Yes.
And for spoken word,
Yes, and I would like to add,
yeah.
and beyond northern Nigeria or Africa, the world is currently embracing spoken word poetry. We've seen Amanda Gorman perform at the presidential inauguration. When she went home, she said her phone crashed because of the number of followers she got. We've seen her perform at the Super Bowl. We've seen a lot of other people who are spoken word artists getting recognition. They're getting brand recognition. We've seen a lot of other spoken word artists.
To come to you, I'm going to come to you, but I want to go to Hidayat. You heard what he said about social issues, and you also mentioned that you're concerned about issues in society and stuff. How is it that the focus of spoken word poetry seems to be mainly on social issues, talking about problems, some for activism in terms of women issue, girl child, education, and all of that. In your opinion, why do you think spoken word poets are so concerned about these issues?
I think it's humanity. Everyone is concerned. Most people are concerned about social issues, social injustice, and I think if you have anything you can do to provide a solution to that problem, you use it. For spoken word artists, they have their voices, so they use it mostly for the social.
You think spoken word can actually change anything?
Yes, it can.
I would like to hear, the audience would like to hear how you think spoken word can cause change, positive change in the society.
Okay. Um, Today is Saturday, right?
Yes, it
On
is.
Thursday, I was at Kaduna. I performed at the Youth Opportunity Summit.
Okay.
So it is a summit that gathers a lot of successful entrepreneurs and a lot of successful people in their careers to talk about opportunities and how youth can leverage opportunities and build a future. So I performed a piece on youth being an entity stitched on art to hold it in place. And after then, I got a lot of messages, people telling me that they have been inspired by their performance. Because at the end, I said, only then will you shine your light. It can never be too late. You can start here now. So a lot of people that are too afraid to start, that are maybe they are discouraged or something like that, are encouraged. So I think that does something. It does. I don't think it does something.
Yeah, hey, yeah, oh yeah. Doctor, to carry on with what she has just said, now you also highlighted the fact that the likes of Shatta, the Maria, and Co. also were concerned about the social issues in their community. Do you think they really change anything?
Poetry in particular, you see that it has been an agent of change in many parts of the world.
Okay.
And ours will not be different. When people are trying to cite a good example of spoken poetry, the speech given by the speech I have with you, which was which play a significant role, especially in the politics of America. And when you look at Nigeria, specifically when you look at the First Republic, in Hausa region of Nigeria in particular, poets were the movers and the shakers of the society. Led Malam Aminu Kano is a poet of Egypt. Malam Mudin Biliki is one of the finest poets that Hausa part of Nigeria has produced. And their work has impacted the community a lot. Even during jihad, it is the poetry that serves as an instrument for mobilizing people. And when you look at it, they have not changed. Fiction poetry has a role to play. It has a place. And even today, when you look at our politics, if people like Buhari wants to, without the words of poets like Rarara and the like, it will be difficult uh, for their voice to reach what it has reached. And that's the tradition. I think all we need to do is to select, to make our work of spoken poetry independent so that we perform, we write for what we want, for what we like, not be dictated by any other part of the world, or not be driven by some mantras, as most of our youth are doing.
Thank you. That's going to take me to the next question I wanted to ask Abul Basit, which is my friend Kaltevi is here would say that while we have this, our oral history and culture, our spoken word poets depend so much on foreign influences. There is this American style. Everybody wants to be like an American poet. Everybody wants to be like an American spoken word. To the point that it even becomes monotonous. The methodology, everybody is doing is almost the same thing. My friend Basha Muneni, who is also a renowned spoken word poet, is always also complaining about everybody doing it's called trap or something. What do you think about this the dominant influence of American style of spoken word instead of perhaps the Mama and Shatta style? And has even the traditional style influenced you as a person?
So I'll start with saying a lot of us, like a lot of other people mentioned yesterday, a lot of us, when we started seeing the art of spoken word poetry as we are seeing it now, we first saw it in America. They were like the direct influences of seeing that we can do it in the way we are doing it now. So, but then when I started spoken word poetry, I was mainly writing in English. performing in the way of how you say it, maybe confessional poetry kind of format. But then over time, I adopted Ingausa, and it's just like a code mixing of English and Hausa. And I've been able to, make myself more relatable to the people that listen to me. So I would say you can get influences from everywhere, from every person, from every place. But it's when you finally find your voice that you settle into the format that you believe in. And even people who are actually doing it American style, as we call it, what makes it the American style? Why is it an American style? How do we classify an American style? Is it because of the way we talk, or the language we use, or the themes that are addressed? What would we call it an American style? Because I generally believe that whatever place we belong in, we share certain social issues, we share certain human issues that makes us kind of relatable, that make us kind of sound the same because we are addressing things that are relatable to us. But maybe in the presentation. So is it the language? Is it the theme? And all of that. And personally, I would say I've been influenced by the cultural tradition and way of oral poetry. Um, for so long, in fact, many people that know me now know me for Ingolsa, Hausa and English.
Yeah,
I've been able to.
Khalid and Dr. Ola.
So for major part of the things that brought me out, Sada is here. He's one of the first people who gave me a big opportunity. It was Hibab, the first year of Hibab. He called on me, if we wanted to do a trailer for our festival. And I did it in Dausa. So we talked about Hausa, culture, tradition, all of that was mentioned in the poem. And even in the background, we had this, what do you call it, like a gogi kind of guitar. So you can see that infusion. And many other times, those happen. So it's about really what you want to do with your poetry. If you feel your poetry is more tilted to that and you identify more to that, then I believe that does it for you. So we can write about so many issues, we can choose a way to address them in such a way that so much now there is a lot of gatekeeping. I believe as much as possible that the gatekeeping should mostly be about is the work good or not. But style and what you choose to address, I don't feel like it should be kept, get kept, whatever. so so mostly now, because the spoken word poetry form is getting cognizance, people are identifying more with it. You see a lot of people just jumping into it. And there's this dilution that is happening, whether we like it or not. So it's mostly about seeing, okay, is this really good? But themes or the way you bring it, I don't think it should be an issue.
Okay, thank you, Hidayat. Over to you. How do you think, before how do you think, what are some of the challenges that you faced, even though I know with the development and performance there's no challenges, but do you feel like there are some pushbacks in terms of what you want to accomplish as a spoken word poet?
Pushbacks, I'm not so sure, but I think spoken word does not get the enough support it's supposed to get.
Okay.
I think mainly the people that mostly appreciate it are people in the literary cycle.
They just perform to a coterie of experts from various fields.
Yes, yes, but then when, for example, now if I'm going to perform at a literary event, my words are a little bit more intense.
Okay.
Then if I'm going to perform at an event where most of the people are not like from a literary background or anything, I mellow down my words a bit to like make them understand more. Um, Also, I think like one of the reasons why the spoken word artists get complain a lot, because yes, they do complain.
Okay.
Like it's because, for example, now musicians are more supported, are more appreciated than spoken word artists. So I think that is one of the pushbacks I can think of.
Okay, Doc, how do we then distinguish from what she has said? Uh, I was going to, my critique would be that everybody is running to spoken word because it gives you fame. And because it gives you fame and it most likely also gives you money. But it's not necessarily because it is unique or special in any way. It's just because who I want to be popular, as she has said, they even want to compare themselves to musicians. Don't you think that that aspiration somehow diminishes the core essence of the art of spoken word, if indeed it is poetry?
I think what we need to understand is what is the essence
Hmm.
of the work of art. Is it to inform people? Is it to entertain people? Is it writing so that you get rid of your emotions, your depressions, and the like?
Hmm.
And when you consider this, you see that if spoken poetry is bringing fame to the people that are into it, then what is the problem of getting fame? I think every writer, it's a dream of every writer to see his work being appreciated. It's a dream of every artist to see his work get into the public. And with that, you see that the spoken poetry is getting a lot of acceptance, especially when we compare it with the conventional written poetry. And because of that, people are rushing into it. Whoever feels he wants to go with that level, he should do. He's free to do that. Some people will stand and write poetry in a traditional way. Some will write the poetry in a way that it will be researched in the university. So people are just writing not because they want to communicate with general public. They are writing it because they want to communicate with special people, with certain people. And they should do that. So let's give freedom to spoken word artists to do their own business as they feel. And I don't think one art will kill another. It's just like when you now people start to use cars and motorcycles and the like. And still some people are still trekking.
Okay.
Yeah, some people are still using horses and donkeys. So
Okay.
I think the spoken word poetry should be allowed to have a breathing space.
Okay.
Whoever wants to go into it,
Be
let
allowed.
it should be allowed. If it is getting appealing, if it is what the society wants, then we are doing art because of the society.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. Because we're running out of time, I'm going to ask Basit the last question. From there, we'll put it to the audience who have one or two questions or contributions to make, and then we'll call it a day. Uh, as a very known spoken word poet from this part of the country, I mean, from the north, uh, what do you think are some of the challenges, and how can we enhance the acceptance of spoken word poetry, especially regarding its role in helping to deal with the social issues that we have in the region?
All right, so personally for me, I would say first and foremost, people should understand the value of that thing as an art form, as something of value, as something that is an intellectual process as well.
Okay.
Because I'm just holding a mic and sounding like I'm singing does not mean it's just random. So the appreciation and knowing the value of the art alone should be able to be in place before every other thing. So that value enough, it's like an indirect gatekeeping that happens. So knowing that there is a value to something would make you identify whether this is good or not. And that generally allows it. So, and I believe mentorship would play a great role in the industry generally. It's an upcoming industry that is still a baby, especially in this part of the country. So the mentorship process would help a lot. Um, People should be able, if you are at least to some extent very established in the industry, when you see people who are coming up, because a lot of them just need a little push, A lot of us actually just need a little push, and
You already have Sata who's pushing
I
you.
need more push. So, but yeah, a lot of us need that guidance of knowing the way to follow. And if you are starting, know who know road and follow the road. It's very important because no man is an island.
Sure.
Yeah. So generally that.
Okay, thank you, my co-panelists, for your insightful contributions to our topic this evening, or is it the afternoon? But at this point, I'm going to give room for the members of the audience to ask one or two questions, and then we will call it a day. Yes, we have one person. I'm going to take only three. We have one, two, three. Thank you. So yes, pass the mic, yes. Then we'll go left, then we'll go right, and we're good.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ibrahim. I have a question. And in written poetry, back in the days, we used to have this trend where you could easily judge a good poem from a bad poem. Do you have similar metrics for judging good spoken word poetry? Do you have similar rubrics? For example, back in the days when I still used to write, it was pretty easy to, of course, judge or a poem on the page if it was good or bad. I know it's still a relative concept, and I understand that. But then, do you have similar ideologies in the spoken word industry where you could separate the wheat from the chaff? Yes, that would be my question. Thanks.
Okay, that question is for Abu Basit, yeah? For all of them.
All right, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for this interesting discussion. Well, I have two things to say. First is a question. Do you think the competitions, the slam spoken word competition, do you think can really help to develop the genre? Then if the answer is yes, how do you see the quality? Because up to now, what I'm not very familiar with is the quality that we can use to gauge whether a spoken word poem is, for example, artistic or beautiful or something like that, compared to the traditional poetry that we know. You develop every day, and you will come to a point in which when you write a written poem, for example, people who know the process that you have followed to come to that particular stage would appreciate you more, especially the literary people that we have. Then spoken word poetry is easier in some cases. Just to public speaking, standing in front of the people, just pronouncing the words anyhow, and assuming that this is spoken word poetry. So what can we do about the quality? And do you think the competitions can help matters? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulian. Thank you for guiding the discussion. I think first, I want to begin by saying that spoken poetry is not any different from performance poetry. In other words, we are only shying away from properly designating what we are doing, because what you are doing is what is called technically, theoretically, performance poetry. In oral literature, the oral traditions, most scholars have argued that you cannot appreciate oral literature or oral poetry, tales, proverbs, all the genres of oral literature can only be adequately appreciated, can only be adequately actualized through performance. And what are you doing? What you are doing is performance poetry. You are taking poems, page poetry, you are taking it to the stage. That's what you are doing. Except that there are some observations. Why you have refused, why you have called it, or you have perceived it as orphan is because you have not properly labeled what you are doing. What you are doing actually is performance poetry, and you must accept this. You must appreciate this. It goes beyond just coming to the stage to read out a poem. You have to perform it. You have to bring it to life. Exactly. Bringing in gestures, mannerisms, because only then will people be able to understand. Some people might not properly understand the words, the metaphors you are trying to put across, but you can perform it, you can bring in gestures, mannerisms, and all of that effect that will show or tell the audience this is the message you are trying to put across. And you spoke about uh, whether this is accepted or it's not being accepted. I think that generally, in the last discussion, uh, emphasis was placed more on looking at the instrumentation, the last discussion, and there were no discussions on the creative ingenuity of the singers, of the artists. It's the same thing for performance poets, for spoken word artists. I think that we must appreciate their creative ingenuity, their ability to bring these words to life, to bring it to stage, to perform it. All of this, of course, is what has actually given value to spoken word poetry. And henceforth, I think that perhaps we need to adequately, as somebody was speaking about value, how do we value? How do we value what is being presented? In other words, of course, there are yardsticks for measuring. There are yardsticks for measuring. Exactly the language, even the performance itself. There are yardsticks, just like the page poetry. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that insightful contribution, Dr. Zikudu. So I will leave our panelists now to respond to the questions that have been raised, and then we'll take it from.
Thank you. I will start from the last comment, which was made by our teacher. You see, that is why I always used to say that some people, you don't need to be intimidated by the spoken poetry. It's just trying to take poetry to another stage, which is matching the performance with the words being spoken. And I think this is what makes spoken poetry so appealing, and that's why it has a lasting effect on the listeners, on the audience. That is why the Martin Luther King's I have a dream remain a speech that always people want to quote. That is why Mayor Angela is well celebrated as a spoken word poet. And that is why up to today, people will still listen to Humanity again because she's a master of it. She's a master of it. And when you look at this, you see that the spoken poet artists are trying to dramatize the poetry. And if the spoken word poetry has good elements of a conventional poetry, it has additional elements of performance. I think it is superb. It is the most excellent work of art that you will have. As to whether the competition will enhance uh, the development of it, I think competition always encourage people to get into it. Many young people are now getting into spoken poetry, especially in this part of the country. And you see they are being appreciated, they are being honored. It is an honor when the guy was asked to went and present before the emir. You don't know what it takes to get to the emir's palace and for emir to listen to. Many people have been writing poems even before Isaiah was born, but none of them gave this recognition. I think we should go for what is acceptable. It's not simple to perform. Yeah.
Let's listen to Abu Basit and then Hidayat. We don't have time. There is another book chart that we need to listen to.
So I think Doctor has done justice to most of the questions, especially when it comes to the aspect of how you differentiate a good poem or not. He mentioned as long as it carries the basic things that makes a poem in written or non-written form, the performance is what makes it stand out. So I'll link it to the next question of whether competitions help or not. So yesterday when we had the slam, the basic things we looked out for were the quality of the poem, the performance, and how they were able to carry the audiences along. So, and I think every performance poem, every spoken word poem would necessarily need that to make it a good poem. And I feel like it is very essential for these competitions to happen because it's just like this festival itself. Having such things give platforms for people to showcase themselves. For example, yesterday, I don't think there is any poet that performed yesterday that was popular or famous. But this is a platform that would make them known to the world. And probably that's the beginning of their breakthrough.
Sure.
Okay, I think I'm just going to comment on the question about whether slums are good for encouraging spoken word artists. I think it is. In 2022, when the Hausa International Book and Arts Festival announced a poetry slam here in Kano, I had never slammed in my life. In fact, Hibas was my first big stage. So the poems that were, the theme of the slam was Kano. So I had to go and research. I had to go and research about kings, about walls, about everything in Kano. And then I wrote 3 poems for that and I slammed and I won. So there is this thing that competition makes you do. It makes you bring out all your guns. It makes you reach your peak. It makes you do something you will not do in a normal day. So I think competitions are, and plus the money is a big motivation. And also, so I think competitions are a very big way of encouraging artists. And this year I slammed and I forgot my poem in the second round, but I really enjoyed it because my poems were very. I can. So it's like you do something that you won't do on a normal day. It makes you bring out all your guns, and well, it's a big encouragement.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Hidayat, for your wins and for inspiring other young ladies or girls like you, I'm sure. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to us. Please put your hands together for my wonderful panelists for doing justice to the orphan form of poetry, which is the spoken word. Thank you for listening to us. Nana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Please put your hands together once more. And please let's acknowledge how much Sada is doing for young poets in Arewa. Please put your hands together for Sada. Sada, please can you, where is he? Okay, but when he's here, we'll recognize him again. We also want to recognize the presence of one of our partners who provided the space for the workshops on the very first day. Please put your hands together for Sani Mohammed, please. Let's see